Welcome to Navigate Now. This is the podcast where we discuss everything around people and places. I'm your host, Jon Docksey, and we're super excited to have a special guest on this particular episode, Marc. Thanks for joining us, Marc. It's fantastic to have you as a guest on this episode. You are the first international guest on this podcast, so super excited to have this conversation to find out about what you're involved in and that all the conversation that we have on these podcasts are around people and places. So, welcome. Just by way of introduction, maybe you could just, for our audience, give a bit of a background of what Marc does and what your experience is.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Marc Conte. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States. I manage 2 business improvement districts in our downtown or center city.
Cool, brilliant. And I understand that maybe stateside they're called SIDS. Is that correct?
Well, in Ohio, they're called SIDS. In most of the rest of the United States, they're called BIDs.
Okay, cool. So unpick what a SID is specifically.
So it's basically, in our case, it's an association of property owners that have come together through a petition process to say, we would like to assess ourselves an additional fee that goes on our property tax, but instead of that money going to the government, it comes back to them, to a nonprofit they set up to put out a plan for services out in the public realm. And so most of the time it's related to cleaning, safety, homeless outreach. And then we do some other activities like placemaking, public art, wayfinding, promotions, events, farmers markets, things like that.
Awesome. There's a connection there, isn't there, kind of between a SID and a BID. And the greater purpose, I guess, is the thing that intertwines those things together.
Yeah. It's all about place management. That there's a dedicated group of property owners that are really focused on one specific area to try to improve it.
Brilliant, and that's why I started this podcast. And we're many episodes down the road now to facilitate a conversation between what I say are custodians of places. So they could be placemaking experts, urban planners, town centre managers, business improvement district directors, board members, etc. Because we all come with a different perspective. And that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation with you in this episode, because we can then raise a dial on what you guys are doing and also how we can learn from everybody in the field. But before we crack on, it'd be good to get to know a little bit about Marc. So tell me something that maybe the audience don't know about Marc.
I always wanted to play the drums. And so finally, when I was an adult, at 29, I started taking drum lessons. And so I never really found the traditional rock pop band to be a part of, or garage band. But I did end up joining a community concert band, and we end up marching every year in the annual Pride Parade.
Cool, brilliant. So is that something you're doing on a regular basis to get ready for the annual events?
Yeah.
Cool, good fun. There's a bit of a trend with some of the guests kind of being involved in music in the background as well. So maybe that's a subset of our industry and our sector.
It's a good outlet.
Brilliant. Yeah, 100%. It's creative, right?
Yes.
Cool. So just then thinking about that blend of wayfinding and place management in that sense, what interests you about navigation and journeys?
There's town centers, downtowns are really everywhere. They're so rich with attractions and places to go. And especially for a lot of American downtowns where we have a lot of people out in the suburbs that may come to downtown maybe once or twice a year to catch a show, or they have some appointment. It can be very daunting because they're just not used to the area. And so making that whole journey as seamless as possible so they want to come back is good. Yeah. And in some cases, people are experiencing some pretty bad events or trauma. We have a major hospital downtown. And so if they're going to visit a family member, say, that's being treated for something, you don't want them to have a bad experience at all. We don't want that to be their worry. Or maybe they're coming down to court for something. So for a whole load of reasons, we want people to have a really good experience from door to door.
I was going to pick up on that, from door to door. It's not just from the time that you get into the car, it's from before that, or the mode of transport that you're going to so choose in that sense. And I think you picked up an important point there around kind of medical destinations as well. There's obviously the entertainment space where we might access a downtown or a town centre or a city centre, whatever it might be. But there's the life function aspects of it as well, that we need to go and visit family members, medical centres, pharmacies, all these aspects that have a mental health aspect to them as well. And that's really important that we allow those journeys to be completed in an effective and as seamless way as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and then we think about, you know, if you kind of know where you're going, or you have all the information available at your fingertips, it can be relatively easy. But if there could be any number of reasons why that isn't the case. And then specifically when you think about people with disabilities, and it could be a whole range of disabilities, and so that even the wayfinding we've now put out on the street doesn't really meet their needs to get where they want to go.
Yeah, we need to understand every type of demographic that use our places. And I'm interested there to unpick a little bit more about you say people might come to downtown periodically in the year, say 3-4 times, 1 time, etc., etc. And you could say effectively that they then go into a new place because it might be different to when they came before.
Right.
So I often think of wayfinding as that hand holding me through an area. It's giving me reassurance, and it's allowing me to discover new things as well. What kind of challenges do you find those individuals having, which come to the place rarely?
I think more than our wayfinding, I think the problem is our street network,
Right.
because we still have a fair number of one-way streets in our downtown. We've been converting more and more of those to two-way, and then there are still a lot of turn restrictions on certain intersections. And ironically, and you know, this goes back 30, 40 years when these restrictions were put in place, but these are exactly where you want somebody to turn. You don't want to have to make them go down a side street to make that turn. And I'm thinking specifically about the main route to our hospital. There are some turn restrictions that I just don't understand why they're there. And then we do our wayfinding, of course, to honor that, so that we put them on a legal route. But they're probably wondering, where is this sign taking me? Because I really want to go down this street, but I'm not allowed to.
Yeah, we've had that in projects where you can see a destination, but the route is not as the crow flies. You can't beeline your way there. And I guess that's about trust in the system as well, isn't it? That this is going back to the concept around holding the hand. It's about understanding that this is the right route, because that's the authority, the custodian of the place has designated that this is where we should go, and being reassured. I often think that route the hospital might be down the road. You can see in your corner of your eye, but the sign says that way. But also, it continues to say that, so it doesn't feel like that you're being lost down a garden path in that sense.
And one thing we remind our attractions several times throughout the process since we put up these signs is that this is not meant to be somebody's primary way of navigating. That theoretically they would have looked up directions on the attraction's website. They would have looked it up on a mapping website. They might have GPS on their phone or in their car. And so we're really there to help augment that and reassure them, but we're not meant to be their turn-by-turn direction.
That picks up on an interesting point around the blended data points in that sense. So we obviously work in a digital world, but obviously that then comes into the physical environment. So it's important that those two connect together. You mentioned around the accessibility side of things. What challenges do you come across in the navigation world with regard to accessibility requirements in your area of the States?
That's a good question. You know, we did put up pedestrian kiosks with wayfinding maps to give better pedestrian orientation to folks, but they're frankly not accessible. I mean, if you're sight impaired, you're not going to be able to use these kiosks, and we don't right now have any augmentation for that. I feel I'm kind of embarrassed to say I'm late to this discussion.
Sure.
I was actually made more aware of this by our local transit authority, which is using some different apps that were coming out over the last 5 or 6 years to help augment people getting around. And a lot more apps have been available, I think, to help people get around, navigate within hospitals and on campuses. And I think that's a real opportunity for us to start investigating that.
100%, because if we, and in one sense, we're always having this conversation, aren't we? One might be there at the beginning of the conversation, one might join midway through, but that is the purpose, is having that conversation. I think is the key thing that brings it all together, to ensure that we're making areas as accessible for folks as we can. Obviously, when we're living in maybe an area where it's got hilly and other terrains and contours, we can't just flatten out a hill. We can't just smooth away a valley in that sense. So it's understanding and taking ownership of our place to a degree, to then making that easy to find easy for them to find their way around. But there's other episodes of this podcast which are really insightful around people with lived experiences with accessibility challenges. So I think it's really important that we engage with those individuals that have lived experience of sight loss, of mobility impairment, etc., to ensure that we deliver something that's relevant for them in their environment.
Yeah, and it's, kind of turning away from wayfinding, but other things that BIDS will do. We do a little bit of snow removal. We don't do everybody's sidewalk. That's the responsibility of the property owner. But we end up clearing out the accessibility ramps at the intersections, because that's where all the snow ends up collecting. The street snow plows push it there, and then the people who do their sidewalks push it there. And then we come by to say, wait a minute, you actually got to be able to cross the street. And it's going to be even more difficult if you can't get over a mound of snow.
100%. Like different times and seasons, the weather hits us with all sorts of curved balls, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting point. We were on a site for a project in a hospital, and they were having a construction work completed, and there was a ramp to get you around, but there was no space for a turning circle for a wheelchair.
Oh.
So it would take you down the route, but you would not be able to turn around the corner. The ramp was there, so they ticked the box of accessibility, but they hadn't thought about that whole process. So it's really important, like you say, of understanding the full picture. What other navigation challenges would you come across in the work that you're involved with in your area?
The smaller attractions, the ones that don't really have the visitor count to warrant, really signs everywhere. They of course want to see more signs for themselves. And under our federal law, we're limited as to how many auto directional signs we could put up in a single location.
Yeah.
And we're constantly trying to negotiate with the traffic engineers about that. And so our contractor who devised our system basically ended up with, some guidepost attractions, the major places like our state house, the hospital, the main library. And if you're a small attraction near that, it's incumbent upon you to say, hey, we're next to the library, follow the signs to the library, and then you'll pick up signs for us. And then we also just, attractions of all sizes, when they hear about wayfinding signs, they think advertising. So they want their sign everywhere.
100%. Yeah.
And we remind them, no, this isn't advertising, this is wayfinding, two different things.
Yeah, definitely. And I see that as well, going back to what we were talking about around that multi touch points of information. That's where I see digital coming in really successfully, is where you've got those key destinations, which also become landmarks. So your hospital, your shopping centre, your mall in that sense. And then we use those as nodes to find our way through the cityscape or the townscape, or even the outdoor environment. It could be a monument, it could be a hill, it could be certain foliage, trees, those kind of landmarks that allow us to navigate around that particular space.
And we have a very large downtown by land area, because a lot of it has been, the boundary has more or less been determined by the interstate highways that went in the 1960s. And so we really wanted to try to break that downtown up into neighborhoods, but we really only found one part of our downtown that truly had an identity as its own place, the arena district outside our NHL arena. And so we have this kind of hybrid system where we are referencing a couple of neighborhoods, but we're also referencing really big attractions. it would have been nice to kind of break it up into quadrants or something more. But like I said, we're not there yet with our neighborhood identities within our downtown.
So, obviously, you mentioned that's still work in progress, but what are your thoughts going forward? And because we see this in lots of areas, of how to then, what I term is, make the area more digestible. So we've talked about using landmarks. We've talked about your thinking process around those neighborhoods and those smaller districts. What are your thinking on what are conversations that are going on at the moment? Not full details necessarily in that sense, but to be able to then start and see the benefit of that being utilized.
Well, in our case, it's just really a matter of getting more development happening and seeing how those businesses and residents want to brand their neighborhood. We have, it's the same story with a lot of downtowns in American cities. The interstate highways came in, transit usage dropped, driving increased, and we lost a lot of our building stock to demolition for surface parking. Now we're in this process of rebuilding, filling in all those spaces. And, we don't want to come in, command and control and say, we dubbed thee this neighborhood or this district. Yeah. So we're waiting for that to percolate up from different neighborhoods. We do have one very large district. They've branded themselves as the Discovery District, but it's really probably too large of an area for navigation purposes. Sure. So you can end up at one part of the Discovery District, but the other part's a mile away, and that's not going to really help you from a navigation perspective.
Definitely. I think that natural use of that natural and connected way of creating spaces to be more digestible is really important. We've seen it when local authorities come in with their planning agenda, master plan, etc., and they'll zone up a town or an industrial area, business park, etc. But that stays as an internal conversation. And I always think that I want these episodes to have 2 or 3 key takeaways that custodians of places, which would be those that will be listening to this episode, so town centre managers, industrial estate managers, urban planners, regeneration experts, etc., can take away into their workflow or future conversations as dials to refine where their next steps are going. And I think that's really important to, like you said there, I like that to be a nice takeaway is don't force it, make it natural and make it for that community.
Yeah, and that's where a business improvement district can really fill a role. We're all about collaboration. You think about a lot of times in the U.S., these things were really set up to counteract the competition we were facing from suburban shopping and entertainment and office districts, where there's one landowner. They can do all the marketing, they do all the leasing, they do all the trash pickup, the security, everything. And in a downtown setting, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of owners. You can't possibly get them all to be on the same page. And a lot of times people try to do that with a voluntary business association, but the dues are not consistent enough and high enough to really do anything. But with these business improvement districts, at least in our case, we're around for 5 years and then we have to go back to everybody to renew.
Yeah,
we can get all these folks together, get them talking. And a lot of times we're the ones who really started to help them build relationships with each other. And then going back to this, what's going to be organic for a neighborhood, we can now turn around and help facilitate that conversation. In one of our districts, like I mentioned, the Discovery District, the centerpiece is the main library and a park where our old state school for the deaf used to be located. It's now a topiary park. It's a living topiary of a George Seurat painting, Afternoon at Le Grand Jatte. It's really amazing.
Cool.
Most people don't know about this park.
Yeah.
And when you exit the library they just put in a new plaza at their back entrance. And when you exit the library, you don't realize you're just 2 blocks from our art museum. And so our what we want to do is something called the Discovery Trail and start doing some trailblazing with public art and other placemaking installations to start connecting all these attractions so you realize just how close all these other things are. And the actual content, so to speak, of the placemaking and the public art We're going to work with the community to develop that, to see what they want and how that speaks about their neighborhood. And we think that'll help lead them into some better neighborhood identity.
I think ownership is really important there, isn't it? Like you mentioned, that's why we use this term custodians of places, because
Yeah.
we don't own it. We don't have control of it. Like you were saying, the out of downtown retail parks, they have that full control of their space, but we don't have that when we're working in that city environment across multiple agencies and owners, businesses, organisations, etc., etc. But I think bringing people along on that journey, because it's their city, it's their town, it's their
Right.
park, it's their school or hospital or whatever it might be. I think it's really important to bring them along on the journey. And that brings me to my next question then, of some great success stories that you've seen in your area or wider around in the States. I know we met in Scotland at a conference from the Association of Town Centre Managers. And so you travel to find what best practice is. So it'd be really good to. I'm sure you've seen some good nuggets that you can share with the audience.
Well, in all my travels, I've been to now England and Scotland, I guess. I really do love the amount of pedestrian-oriented signage there is. And, we're trying really hard to rebuild a pedestrian culture in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think those types of signs are going to be much more important. And so I would love to see more of that happening in our downtown. And I've seen that in a lot of other downtowns in the US, and it's been really great. And it helps it, while I mentioned that, yes, this is not meant to be advertising for the attractions, but it is a good reminder to say, oh my God, I didn't know we had X, Y, or Z attraction. I might not go there now, but I'm going to go there, on another visit.
For me, we talked about landmarks, didn't we? In that sense,
Yeah.
those attractions are destinations. There are landmarks that we navigate by, but they also tell the story of the place. And for me, wayfinding is about 2Ds. It's about destination. I want to get to the sports stadium, the mall, the hospital. I need to get there. I've got time. I will just get me there now. But it's all about discovery. And like you say, I didn't realise that plaza has just opened in that sense, and creating a trail to allow me to not miss out on those opportunities, I think is really important. And wayfinding might be a facilitator of that, but I think the priority should be the experience and the journey of the place.
Yeah.
Cool. That's any other success stories that you've kind of navigated around and seen in the US?
I'm hard pressed to think of something, but it's just when I go out for lunch and walk around, and I see people using our pedestrian kiosks, I see that as a success. I'm like, beautiful, they're using it. We do get a lot of out of town visitors for a lot of weekends. A lot of times it's sporting events, and it's just wonderful to see people actually taking advantage of that. It was always interesting. We were putting in our wayfinding sign system right probably about a year before smartphones were introduced.
Sure.
And so as more and more people got smartphones, I kept thinking, well, gosh, what's the use of all this stuff we just put out?
Yeah.
But it's, like I said, it's still useful. And I'm, thinking about looking to the future, augmented reality with glasses and everything, that's all fancy and nice. I would love to see, though, a better integration of technology with things that are happening out in the real world, but without having to have that technology be right in your face all the time. It was really interesting. People were really trying hard to make QR codes happen before COVID, and they weren't catching on. And then COVID happened, and we had an actual good use for them. And so now it's a lot more natural to use a QR code for something. So I don't know if that's going to be the long-term future, but I think there's going to be a lot of ideas out there like that we can take advantage of, and we got to be ready for.
Yeah, definitely. How that integrates, I think, is really important, because sometimes we talk on this podcast about the future of wayfinding, the future of digital, and your kind of default answer could be everything digital. Now, the work that we get involved with in the medical sector just shows, maybe more than others, that digital is not the total way to go, because well, there's so many different user demographics that we don't want to ensure people are cut out of the environment through digital poverty in that sense. So what do you think is an important focus in the future for how we navigate and that blend of digital and physical in the environment?
Yeah, one thing is we always want to rush to the new and shiny, and we always want to rush to the new tech, and sometimes analog is just better.
Mm.
It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be more reliable. It's not going to be an LED screen that needs electricity and now we got to run power, in the right of way, or it's not going to be an LED screen that's going to be hurt by weather, or maybe the power just goes out or a circuit goes bad. Our analog signs are up no matter what. Yeah, the wind comes along and sometimes twists them a little bit, but
Yeah.
we can easily fix that, and the sign's still there.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to not throw away the analog and keep that around, see what we can use technology, but always start with that question of what problem are we trying to solve and what's the best tool to solve it, rather than saying we found this tech, let's find a problem to solve it with.
100%. And do you see a difference in the need of wayfinding devices information through the visitors that come to the downtown and the residents within that space? Because I often see that as an interesting dynamic where we've got a retail centre, say where people are coming regularly. That's a very different wayfinding challenge than somewhere where a tourist destination where people are coming infrequently or rarely.
Yeah, good. It reminded me a couple summers ago, I attended an international swim meet. These are like 5Ks and marathons. Anyone can just go.
Yeah.
And I swim with a master's team in Columbus, and we decided to have a group go to that. It was at the pool from the Olympics over in Stratford, and so I was trying to use Google Maps to navigate from the tube stop to the pool, and I ended up in the parking garage of the mall there. And I just followed the analog signs, I probably would have been fine and had a much more enjoyable journey.
100%. And I guess that goes, in a sense, back to when we were talking there about kind of dedicated retail areas. When we are in control of the physical signage, we can curate that route.
Yeah.
Whereas when we're reliant on technology, it doesn't know where the best shops are. It doesn't know necessarily where the most accessible route is. We had a project where the Google Maps was taking you up a field, up a very steep slope. Whereas you could have just gone to the left a little bit, gone across the pathway, and you would have been dead fine. So, yeah, technology is great. But what I think technology does, it brings a richer layer to the physical information that we provide in that sense. They complement each other nicely. Where do you see kind of like in 5 or 10 years time, what do you think navigation will look like?
Oh boy, I don't know. I think you're probably in a better position to answer that. But I think it's just what we have now, but it'll be better, and I think the technology will catch up to where we want it to be. And I think it'll be interesting to see what AI will do with that and how that ends up, thinking about how AI can start influencing your routes on Google Maps, and that maybe that is going to be providing a better curated journey for you if your smartphone really knows what you're looking for.
For me, I'm really excited how technology can be used to make places accessible for all.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. That's what we're really excited about, ensuring that whatever that place is, whatever condition or situation I find myself in life, I want everywhere to be available to as many people as possible. That also goes down to what we call situational impairment. So I might be on my way to the airport. I've got a suitcase that weighs 30 kilos. I can't be lugging that up a flight of stairs.
Right.
Normally, I would just run up those set of stairs. But now I might have a pushchair, I might have a suitcase, I might be carrying something to an exhibition or for a business meeting or something like that. And it's about making the place navigatable, accessible for everyone in their situation. And that's where I think technology can blend, because those routes are individual. Those routes are not general in that sense. And that's where we're really excited about where technology can come in and provide that wealth of information to be able to then provide the route that is required for that particular situation at that particular moment. That could be weather could chuck in a scenario that means that it has to change. Like you were saying, I love the example there around kind of clearing the snow on the ramps.
Yeah.
Whereas on the sidewalks and the highways, they're fine. But who thought about that bit in the middle? And I think that's really important. That connectivity of the journey, I think, is really important to make sure no solution is going to be perfect for everybody.
And what you're talking about also goes back to, it's always important to remember these things are, wayfinding's been for people who don't know where they're going.
Yes.
You know, I go to the same places most of the time. I usually know where I'm going. I don't need it. I'm pretty, I always know which way is north, except for some European cities when I get twisted around. But, you know, a lot of American cities are grid pattern streets. It's pretty easy to navigate. But there's people who are still directionally challenged. And then, you know, there's all these other users that for it might be any accessible reason or situational or any other reason, they might not know where they're going. So it's important to check in with all these different types of users to see, is this actually working for you? I notice this when I go out of town. In Columbus, we have these really, really giant street signs for the street names. And so if you're on a street going pretty fast, the type is large enough that you can see it and have time to turn. And I go to these other cities and they're really small. And that the person who put it up probably thought, well, I know what street this is. I can see it. But it's not meant for you. It's meant for the person who doesn't know what street that is.
100%. So what would be, I mean, I've super enjoyed this conversation in this particular episode of the podcast. What would be a takeaway that you would like to pass on to a custodian of place to say, just make sure we cover off this one thing, these two things to make your place easy to navigate or just a better place to come to, like we said at the head of the conversation, so people come back again?
Yeah, I think it's you can't make good decisions without good information, and so in this case, it's about talking to people. What challenges do the attractions have? What challenges do your visitors have? And in each of those categories, there's a range of different types of people and attractions, and so it's getting out there to talk to everybody and coming back to them as you're developing a system. And keep testing it with them to make sure you're able to meet as much as possible within your budget.
Fantastic. I think there's some really good takeaways there for our audience. I mean, it's really good to have you on today's episode. Where, if people want to find out a bit more about Marc and the work that you're involved in, where can they find you?
They can go to downtownservices.org.
Cool, brilliant. No, thanks very much for joining us on this episode of the podcast Navigate Now. It's been a delight to have you as our guest and to learn about the work that you're doing over in the USA. And thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now. We've just had a fantastic conversation with Marc. Thanks to him for joining us on this particular episode. If you enjoy this content, please feel free to like and subscribe so we can continue the conversation around creating great places for every person.